My husband forced me to serve his mistress in my own home, but he never expected me to take everything from him. The biting chill of the Christmas season had settled over our town, a picturesque frosting on the eaves and a crispness in the air that usually brought with it a sense of warmth and togetherness. This year, however, it carried an undercurrent of something else, something unsettling. Bruce's childhood friend, Martha, a name that had always hung in the periphery of our lives, had suffered an unfortunate accident. A broken leg, he'd said, a dramatic fall during a winter hike. With no one else to care for her, Bruce, ever the concerned friend, announced he was bringing her to our home. He asked me, his wife of nearly 5 decades, to help look after her. He didn't ask with concern for my feelings, but with an expectation of my compliance. Without a word of complaint, at least not outwardly, I began to tidy up the guest room. It was a room rarely used, a repository for forgotten things and quiet afternoons. As I was dusting the antique writing desk, preparing for Martha's arrival, my hand brushed against a loose floorboard beneath it. Curiosity, a seldom indulged impulse in my carefully ordered life, got the better of me. I pried it open. Inside, nestled in the dim space, was not dust, but a meticulously preserved collection of letters, tied with faded silk ribbons. Letters spanning over 40 years, exchanged between my husband, Bruce, and Martha. There were hundreds, perhaps more than 500, a silent, ink-stained testament to their nearly 5-decade-long entanglement. My fingers trembled as I untied the first bundle. In those pages, Bruce, my Bruce, the distinguished professor, the man I had built a life with, poured out his longing, his unwavering devotion, and his fervent love for Martha. Their words, intimate and passionate, leaped off the brittle paper, painting a vivid picture of a relationship I had never known existed. Each sentence was a stab to my heart. Reading those letters, my world tilted on its axis. My heart pounded with a suffocating mix of shock, betrayal, and a sudden, terrifying clarity. The marriage I had believed to be solid, if somewhat passionless, a comfortable partnership built on years of shared history, had, in reality, been riddled with cracks, with a gaping chasm from the very start. And I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that a forced love, a life built on lies, was never meant to last. It was a sham, and I had been its unsuspecting, compliant victim. So, when Bruce finally wheeled Martha into our home a few days later, her leg propped up in a cast, a smug little smile playing on her lips, I met him not with the weary resignation he expected, but with a calm, almost preternatural resolve. I looked him directly in the eye, my voice even, betraying none of the turmoil that had raged within me for days. "Bruce," I said, the words hanging in the suddenly silent room, "we need to talk. Let's get a divorce." His polite smile faltered. Martha's head snapped towards me, her eyes widening. "You were unfaithful for the entirety of this marriage," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "So, you will leave with nothing." By the time Bruce actually brought Martha through our front door, a whirlwind of emotions had already raged through me and settled into a steely calm. I had spent hours, days, with those damning letters, rereading them, absorbing the depth of the deceit, the years of stolen moments, whispered promises, and shared intimacies that had never been mine. I sat quietly in the living room, the evidence, copies, of course, the originals safely hidden, resting in a locked briefcase by my side. I watched as he carefully, almost reverently, pushed her wheelchair inside. They both wore smiles, Bruce the ever-gentle scholar, exuding an air of intellectual refinement that now seemed like a carefully constructed facade. Martha, despite the cumbersome cast on her leg, carried herself with the kind of effortless grace, an artistic flair, that always made people take notice. If ever there were a perfect embodiment of the phrase wolves in sheep's clothing, it was the two of them, collaborators in a lifelong deception. I stared at them, a cold knot forming in my stomach, thinking how, if not for that accidental discovery, I would have never suspected that my nearly 70-year-old, highly respected retired professor of a husband was capable of such profound, enduring betrayal all these years. Nor would I have ever imagined that Martha, the celebrated artist, lauded for both her considerable talent and her supposedly sterling character, would willingly, eagerly play the role of the other woman for decades, a shadow haunting my marriage. Bruce's smile, that practiced, charming smile he reserved for the public and, apparently, his mistress, faded the moment he noticed me sitting there, watching them. Annoyance, quick and sharp, flickered across his face. "Debbie, why are you just sitting here?" he asked, his voice edged with impatience. "Did you finish preparing the guest room? Is dinner ready? Martha needs to rest." That cold indifference, that commanding tone. He wasn't speaking to me like a wife of over 40 years, a partner in life. No, he spoke to me the way one would speak to a hired domestic, issuing orders without a shred of care or affection. Our marriage, I realized with a sudden, brutal clarity fostered by those letters, had always been like this, unequal. Bruce gave commands. I obeyed. He managed the grand intellectual pursuits. I managed the mundane. He never smiled at me the way he did at Martha just moments before, with that easy warmth, that shared understanding. With me, there was no warmth, no tenderness, only demands, expectations, and a subtle, pervasive disregard. My nose stung, a familiar precursor to tears I had suppressed for far too long. But I held them back. I had spent countless hours over the past few days sitting in this very spot, sorting through my tumultuous thoughts, accepting the ugly truth I had always subconsciously tried to ignore. And yet, even with all that acceptance, the pain was unavoidable, a raw, gaping wound. I was human after all. I had feelings, a heart that was now shattered into a million pieces. I had married Bruce when I was just 20 years old, a young woman full of hope and naive dreams. 48 years, nearly half a century. I had devoted myself, my entire adult life, to this man, this family, this carefully curated image of domesticity. And this blatant, casual cruelty was how he repaid me. Bruce's frown deepened when I didn't immediately jump to my feet to do his bidding. "Debbie, did you not hear me? What kind of attitude is this? Sitting there like a statue in front of our guest. Martha must be exhausted. Do you have no manners?" From her wheelchair, Martha watched our exchange with a faint, almost imperceptible smirk of satisfaction, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. Then, in a soft, concerned voice, dripping with false sympathy, she said, "Oh, Bruce, dear, please don't be harsh with Debbie. Is she upset about taking care of me? I truly don't want to be a burden. Perhaps this wasn't a good idea." Her voice was like honey laced with arsenic. Bruce's irritation melted instantly at her words. He turned to Martha with a bright, reassuring smile, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in decades. "Don't be silly, Martha, my dear. Why would she mind?" He gestured dismissively in my direction without even looking at me. "She's just a housewife. She has nothing else to do all day. Of course, she's happy to help. Aren't you, Debbie?" I almost laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. When exactly had I ever said I was happy to take care of his mistress? Whatever lingering, microscopic shred of attachment I might have had for Bruce, any residue of past affection, evaporated in that single callous moment. I looked at him, truly looked at the man I had spent nearly my entire life with, and saw him for what he truly was. The veneer of respectability, the charm, the intellect, it was all stripped away, leaving only the ugly, selfish truth beneath. There was nothing left of my love or admiration for him, only a profound, sickening disgust. "Bruce," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "if you want to take care of Martha, you may do it yourself. I have no obligation, moral or otherwise, and certainly no responsibility to help you with your guest." I paused, letting my words sink in. He stared at me, his jaw slackening. Martha's eyes widened, her painted smile frozen. "And there's something I need to tell you, something I mentioned earlier," I continued, savoring the shift in power, the dawning horror on his face. "We are getting a divorce." I spoke each word slowly, deliberately, and clearly, leaving no room for misunderstanding or doubt. Bruce froze, his face paling, as if I had just slapped him. His finger trembled as he pointed at me, disbelief warring with dawning anger written all over his face. You must be out of your mind, Debbie. What is this nonsense? I let out a cold, humorless laugh. No, Bruce. For the first time in my life, I believe I'm thinking with absolute unclouded clarity. I want a divorce, and I want it now. For over 40 years, I had been the obedient, docile wife, never stepping out of line, never failing to meet his expectations, however unreasonable. The sudden, unequivocal declaration of divorce was something Bruce, in his arrogance, simply couldn't process. Debbie, what is this nonsense? He repeated, his voice rising. You're upset about taking care of Martha, is that it? If you didn't want to, you should have just said so. There's no need for such dramatics. His voice carried a faint exasperation, a clear attempt to twist the situation, to paint me as the unreasonable, hysterical one, as if my supposed cruelty and selfishness were the only conceivable reasons I would dare to speak of divorce. Martha, ever the actress, immediately put on a pitiful, heart-wrenching expression, her eyes shimmering with false remorse. "Oh, Bruce, I'm so sorry," she cooed, reaching out a perfectly manicured hand to touch his arm. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't broken my leg, you two wouldn't be fighting. Debbie, please, I can go to a recovery facility." Bruce turned to her with a look of profound, reassuring tenderness. "This has nothing to do with you, Martha. Don't you worry your pretty head about it. Debbie is just having one of her episodes. You know how women her age can be." Then, without even looking at me, he added dismissively, "If you don't want to take care of her, fine, I'll hire a nurse. It's no matter. Martha, let's get you settled." Without a second thought, he turned the wheelchair around and started pushing Martha toward the guest room, completely disregarding me, as if my words, my declaration, my life-altering decision had been nothing more than a passing tantrum, a minor inconvenience. I raised my voice, sharp and cutting, stopping him in his tracks. "Bruce, make time in your busy schedule to go to the courthouse with me. We need to file for divorce. Oh, and while we're at it," I added, the casualness of my tone belying the steel beneath, "we'll need to discuss the division of assets as well, and I assure you, it will be a very interesting discussion." Bruce didn't acknowledge me. He didn't even turn around. He simply walked away with his precious Martha, pushing her down the hallway, leaving me behind like an afterthought, a piece of discarded furniture in the home I had maintained for him for nearly half a century. But this time, I wasn't an afterthought. I was the storm he never saw coming. The moment they disappeared down the hall, their hushed whispers a mocking echo in the suddenly cavernous house, I moved. I carefully packed away the decades' worth of letters between Bruce and Martha, his declarations of love, her complicit replies, their shared secrets now my ammunition. I took them, along with copies of travel itineraries, hotel receipts, and photographs I'd found stashed with the letters, evidence of clandestine trips taken while I managed our home and his life, and headed straight to a highly recommended law firm. Downtown, I needed to consult a lawyer, a shark, about the divorce. Ms. Eleanor Vance was a woman whose sharp intellect was matched only by her impeccably tailored suit. She listened patiently as I laid out the sordid tale, my voice trembling at first, then steadying with resolve. After reviewing my substantial evidence, the letters, the financial records I'd started pulling, the sheer volume of deceit, she informed me, with a glint in her eye, that if the proof of adultery was as solid as it appeared, there was a distinct possibility that Bruce, as the demonstrably unfaithful party in our long-term marriage, could walk away with absolutely nothing. "In this state, Mrs. Albright," she said, her tone firm, "adultery can heavily influence the division of marital assets, especially when it's been so prolonged and egregious, and when it involves the dissipation of marital funds on the affair." We talked for over 2 hours. I detailed his income, the properties we owned, or rather he controlled, his pension, his investments. By the time I left Ms. Vance's office, clutching a list of documents she needed, I had a clear, comprehensive plan in mind. Bruce had shown me no mercy, no respect, for decades. He had treated me as a convenience, a domestic servant. But I wouldn't be as heartless as him, not entirely. Not for his sake, but for our children, Eddie and Sandra, or so I thought at the time. Eddie and Sandra had built successful lives of their own, each with thriving careers and young families. Eddie was a financial analyst, sharp and ambitious, perhaps a little too much like his father in that regard. Sandra was a marketing executive, creative and driven. I didn't want this divorce, this ugly mess, to turn into a public spectacle that could tarnish their names or affect their careers. I still clung to the hope that they would understand, that they would be horrified by their father's actions. As long as Bruce agreed to the separation and a fair, in my new definition of fair, settlement, I wouldn't go out of my way to utterly destroy him publicly. I would keep the worst of the details contained, if possible. I stored the original evidence in a secure safety deposit box, took a copy of the drafted divorce agreement Ms. Vance had prepared, one that heavily favored me, citing his infidelity as grounds for an unequal distribution of assets, and returned home. The house felt cold, alien. Martha's presence, even unseen, was a suffocating pall. The moment I walked through the door, my briefcase heavy in my hand, I saw Eddie and Sandra sitting on the living room couch, their expressions grim. Bruce must have called them immediately, painting himself as the victim, me as the irrational, hysterical wife. My heart sank. This was going to be harder than I thought. Eddie was the first to speak, his tone sharp with frustration, his eyes narrowed. "Mom, what the hell are you doing? Dad called us. He's distraught. Why would you suddenly ask him for a divorce after all these years? And on Christmas of all times?" A cold wave swept through me as I looked at my son, the child I had nursed, whose fevers I had cooled, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the child I had raised with every ounce of my being, the child who now spoke to me as if I were the one in the wrong, the perpetrator of some heinous crime. Sandra chimed in, her voice carrying an edge of disbelief, her perfectly styled hair unmoved by her agitation. "Mom, Dad told us you're planning on leaving him. After all these years. Why? Is that really necessary? Can't you two just talk this out? He said you were upset about Aunt Martha staying here." I clenched my fingers around the divorce papers in my briefcase. They didn't know the full story, not yet. I couldn't entirely blame them for their initial reaction, conditioned as they were by years of their father's carefully constructed image. But soon, I reasoned, they would. Bruce and I were going our separate ways. Once that happened, there was no doubt in my mind that he would attempt to marry Martha, or at least make their relationship public, and the truth would eventually come out anyway. I might as well be the one to tell them first, to prepare them. "Your father," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs, "has been cheating on me." I let the words hang in the air, watching their faces for any flicker of understanding, of sympathy. He and Martha have been having an affair for decades, over 40 years. I found letters, hundreds of them. I paused, expecting shock, outrage, support. I won't sit back and tolerate it any longer. I am divorcing him. I had poured my love, my life into these children, raised them with meticulous care and unwavering devotion. I had believed, naively, foolishly, that they would stand by my side, that my pain would be their pain. I thought they would be furious on my behalf, that they would call Bruce and Martha out for their shamelessness, their cruelty. I was so wrong. Eddie furrowed his brows, not in shock, but in discomfort. "Mom, look, we've known about Dad and Aunt Martha for a long time." My breath caught in my throat. "Known?" He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "They were deeply in love back then, before he even met you, but circumstances, family pressure from your side, forced them apart. Aunt Martha never married, Mum. She's been waiting for Dad all these years. Isn't it kind of natural that he still has feelings for her? That they have a connection? Natural? Waiting?" My mind reeled. The casualness of his words, the complete lack of concern for my devastation, was like a physical blow. Sandra nodded in solemn agreement, her expression one of gentle reproof, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Mum, honestly, given Dad's status, his intellect, it's perfectly normal for him to have close female friends, intellectual companions. You've spent your whole life as a housewife. You don't really share his world, do you? You don't have those deep conversations with him. To be brutally honest, you were never really a good match for Dad intellectually. You do know he was kind of forced into marrying you by your parents, right? She looked at me with something almost like pity, a condescending sympathy that made my blood boil. You're making a big deal out of nothing, Mom, Sandra added, her voice softening into a placating tone that grated on my nerves. Dad and Aunt Martha are just close friends. They always have been. They would never do anything to actually betray you. They have too much character for that. Do you really have to stir up so much trouble over this? Think of the family. Think of the scandal. If I hadn't seen Bruce's explicit letters, if I hadn't read his declarations of undying love for Martha, his descriptions of their romantic trysts, their shared dreams of a future together without me, I might, just might, have believed them. I might have doubted my own sanity, fooled myself into thinking he and Martha were truly innocent, that their connection was purely platonic. But how could they be? 40 years of tangled emotions detailed in ink, 40 years of clandestine holiday getaways spent together, far from my unsuspecting eyes. 40 years where Bruce never once brought me flowers, never gave me a single thoughtful gift, never remembered my birthday without a reminder. Yet he showered Martha with presents, elaborate tokens of his affection. He never remembered what I liked, what my favorite color was, or my favorite book. But he knew Martha's preferences like the back of his hand. Every nuance, every desire, all meticulously chronicled in his love letters to her. I had always assumed this sordid affair was something just between Bruce and Martha, a shameful secret they kept hidden from everyone, including their own families. I had thought my children, like me, had been kept entirely in the dark. But now, looking at their composed faces, listening to their callous justifications, I knew the horrifying truth. I looked at Eddie, then at Sandra, my voice hollow, barely a whisper when I spoke. So, you both knew? You knew all along? About the extent of it? They nodded in unison, a silent confirmation that shattered the last vestiges of my maternal illusions. Eddie was the first to respond, shifting uncomfortably under my suddenly cold gaze. Mom, we didn't mean to keep it from you. We didn't want to upset you. Dad's a respectable man, a prominent figure, and Aunt Martha isn't some random woman he picked up. She's an artist, a family friend. We trust their character. They wouldn't have crossed the line in a vulgar way. Wouldn't cross the line? My mind flashed to passages from the letters, descriptions of passion that left nothing to the imagination. Sandra quickly chimed in, her tone becoming more insistent. Mom, please, stop making such a fuss over nothing. This isn't the time to throw a jealous tantrum. Think about the family's reputation. Think about us, our careers, our children. Stop talking about divorce like it's some casual, everyday thing. It's destructive. I nearly choked on my own breath, a strangled gasp caught in my throat. My husband's lifelong betrayal was excruciatingly painful, a dagger to the heart. But my children's reaction, their casual dismissal of my pain, their complicity in his deceit, their defense of him and his mistress, that was unbearable. This was worse, so much worse. Had I really raised them? Had I really spent my life pouring love and devotion into two children who now stood before me, defending the man who had systematically humiliated me for nearly 50 years, and the woman who had enabled it? My heart felt like a barren wasteland, all warmth and affection scorched away. The climax of this chapter wasn't just their knowledge, it was their active, unashamed defense and their attempt to silence me. Eddie saw the rage darkening my face, the dangerous glint in my eyes, and hastily tried to smooth things over, speaking in an overly patient, condescending tone, as if I were a stubborn, unreasonable child he needed to manage. Mom, I get it. You're upset, you're emotional. But what does getting a divorce actually change now at your age? You have no job. You've been out of touch with the professional world for decades. How are you going to survive on your own? Who's going to take care of you? Sandra nodded in vigorous agreement, her perfectly coiffed hair bobbing. Exactly, Mom. You've had a comfortable life with Dad, a beautiful home, financial security. You never had to work a day since you married him. You never had to worry about money, about bills. What more do you actually want? Some kind of dramatic revenge? A comfortable life? I let out a laugh, a cold, bitter, mirthless sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Comfortable? You call this comfortable? I had never lived a comfortable life, not in the way they meant. I once had a promising career in academia myself, a bright future. But Bruce's parents were in poor health not long after we married, and he, with his demanding career, needed me to focus on their care. So, I gave up my aspirations. I stayed home to take care of them, to nurse them through their final years. Then we had children, Eddie and Sandra, and I devoted myself entirely to raising them, to ensuring their comfort, their success. By the time they were grown and out of the house, there were grandchildren to look after, school pickups and drop-offs, meals to cook, a household to run. For nearly 50 years, I had never truly lived for myself. I had always been someone's daughter-in-law, someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother. Never, not once, had I simply been Debbie. And I had never complained. I had shouldered these burdens, these responsibilities, willingly, or so I had convinced myself. I had believed, foolishly, that my sacrifices were seen, acknowledged, and appreciated, that my unwavering love and dedication were understood, valued. But to them, to my own children, I had merely been enjoying life, living in idle luxury. "Tell me, Sandra, Eddie," I said, my voice trembling with a tightly controlled fury. "What kind of luxury is waking up before dawn every single day to make breakfast for a family that barely acknowledges your presence? What kind of privilege is scrubbing floors, washing mountains of clothes, running endless errands, planning and preparing 3 meals a day after day, year after year, without a single day off? In 48 years of marriage, I have never traveled for leisure, never seen a movie in a theater without it being a children's film, never attended a concert that wasn't a school recital. I was nothing more than a glorified unpaid maid in this house, and even maids, at least, get paid. They get days off. They get respect for their labor. I had nothing. Nothing but ingratitude and betrayal. I stared at my children, my face a mask of frozen disbelief and dawning horror at their casual cruelty. Their blank stares, their inability to comprehend the depth of my sacrifice, my pain, was more damning than any insult. Eddie, sensing perhaps that he might have gone too far, that the hysterical woman was morphing into something else, something colder and more dangerous, softened his voice, though the condescension remained. "Mum, look, if you don't want to take care of Aunt Martha, that's fine. Dad can hire a full-time nurse. It's not a problem. Just don't make this into a big, ugly scene. You've lived in this neighborhood for so long. Do you really want the neighbors gossiping about you, about the family? Gossiping about me? They truly thought I was the potential embarrassment here, not their adulterous father or his decades-long mistress." Eddie continued, pressing his advantage, or so he thought. "Just call Dad, apologize for the outburst, smooth things over. Let's all just move past this, for everyone's sake." My hands trembled with a rage so profound it left me breathless. Sandra, ever practical, ever self-serving, added her own poison to the brew. "Actually, Mom, I really need Aunt Martha's help with something right now. She has some incredible connections in the art world, and she's offered to introduce me to a gallery owner who could be huge for my new marketing campaign. So, even if you don't care about Dad or your dignity, at least think about me. Don't make her hate us. Just call Dad and say you're sorry, for my sake. Please?" Then, before I could react, before I could voice the torrent of outrage and disgust building within me, Sandra, with a look of grim determination, dialed Bruce's number on her phone and shoved it into my hand, holding it there, waiting, Eddie nodding encouragement beside her. For 48 years, whether I was right or wrong, I had always been the one to apologize first. I had always been the one to bow my head, to smooth things over, to keep the peace at any cost. And now, they expected me to do it again. They expected me to apologize to the man who had spent his entire married life secretly loving another woman, writing passionate love letters to her while treating me, his wife, like a shadow, a piece of furniture. While he had been traveling the world with Martha, indulging in romantic escapades and enriching their intellectual companionship, I had been trapped within the four walls of this house, invisible, unimportant, slowly suffocating, and they still expected me to lower my head, to swallow my pain, to beg for scraps of his tainted affection. My heart felt barren, a desolate landscape where love had once bloomed. I looked at my son and my daughter, the very children I had poured my life into, raised with my own hands, who now treated me like a bothersome stranger, an obstacle to their ambitions. The moment they had grown up, established their own lives, built their own careers with the foundation I had painstakingly provided, I had become nothing to them, worthless. Maybe now that they earned their own money, made their own way in the world, they looked down on me, the stay-at-home mother who had never worked a day. Not only did they have no respect for me, but they clearly saw me as weak, as someone to be dismissed, manipulated, and trampled over. I glanced down at the phone they had pressed into my unwilling hand. From the other end, after a few rings, Bruce's cold, impatient voice came through. "What is it, Sandra?" "I'm busy with Martha." Under Eddie and Sandra's expectant, almost threatening gazes, I brought the phone to my ear. I took a deep, steadying breath. Then I spoke, my voice clear, resonant, and utterly devoid of its usual deference, enunciating every single word with chilling precision. "Bruce," I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's Debbie. I'm just calling to tell you again, in case you misunderstood me earlier. I want a divorce. Come over to the house now so we can discuss the terms and sign the preliminary papers. I have them ready." A shocked silence filled the other end of the line. Then Bruce sputtered, "Debbie, are you still on about that? I told you, if you don't want to help with Martha." "This isn't about Martha anymore, Bruce." I cut him off, my voice like ice. "This is about 48 years of lies. It's over. Be here within the hour, or I'll have Ms. Vance, my lawyer, contact your office directly, and we can do this the hard way. Your choice." Bruce didn't take me seriously. Not really. He brushed me off with a few half-hearted scoldings, telling me to stop being hysterical and think of the family, before hanging up abruptly. Eddie and Sandra, seeing that I was resolute, that their pressure tactics had failed spectacularly, shook their heads in exasperation, muttering about my stubbornness, my irrationality. To them, I was being unreasonable, vindictive even. They didn't stay long after that. They had no interest in standing by me, in offering any comfort or support. They had their own agendas, their own loyalties, and clearly, I was no longer a part of them. And just like that, I was alone, utterly and completely alone, in a house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. I sat on the couch, the silence deafening, staring at the emptiness around me. A bitter, broken laugh escaped my lips. My whole life. What a joke. What a pathetic, pitiful, wasted existence. But self-pity wouldn't get me anywhere. There was no one to turn to, no one to share my grief or my outrage. I had only myself. And for the first time in my life, I was going to fight. Fight for me. For my dignity. For my future. The climax here wasn't just my refusal, but the finality of my decision and the dawning realization of my complete isolation, which in turn fueled my resolve. Bruce hadn't made a single move since our last terse phone call. He probably thought I would cave, that the weight of my children's disapproval and my own ingrained habits of capitulation would eventually wear me down. He imagined I would swallow my pride, my hurt, like I always had, and things would return to their dysfunctional normal. Too bad for him. I had no intention of backing down, not this time, not ever again. The woman he thought he knew, the one he had molded into quiet submission, was gone. In her place was someone he wouldn't recognize, someone forged in the fires of betrayal and steeled by a newfound, desperate courage. I gave him a week. 7 long, agonizing days passed. He never showed up. He never called. He thought he could ignore me, treat my demand for a divorce as a temporary aberration, a menopausal whim that would pass. He was so profoundly, catastrophically wrong. His silence, his arrogance, only solidified my resolve. It was the ultimate act of disrespect, the final confirmation that to him I was nothing. So I started packing. Eddie and Sandra, after their initial disastrous intervention, had made themselves scarce. They hadn't called, hadn't visited. Their silence was its own condemnation, a clear message that they had chosen their side, and it wasn't mine. They had proven themselves to be just as cold, just as selfish, just as manipulative as their father. I had once worried about protecting them, about keeping the ugliness of the divorce quiet for their sake, to shield their careers and their social standing. But after that last gut-wrenching conversation, after their blatant disregard for my pain and their chilling defense of their father's infidelity, I saw how foolish, how misguided I had been. In this house, in this family, I was nothing. No one cared about my feelings, my dignity, my life. So why should I continue trying to protect people who treated me like I was invisible, disposable? I wasn't just going to divorce Bruce. I was going to make sure he walked away with absolutely nothing. He had built his career, his reputation, his comfortable life, on my back, on my family's support, on my unpaid labor. It was time for him to pay his due. Box by box, I began to pack up his things. His meticulously organized library of academic texts, his tailored suits hanging like silent sentinels in the closet, his expensive shoes lined up in neat rows, his collections of pens and pipes, his countless awards and framed degrees. It was only as I systematically sorted through the detritus of our shared life, or rather his life that I had merely facilitated, that I realized just how much of the house, its contents, its very essence, belonged to him, or was perceived to belong to him. His clothes, his shoes, his books, his papers, his cherished belongings filled dozens of boxes, which soon covered the expansive living room floor, stacking up in the hallway like a monument to his self-importance. And then there was me. In over 48 years of marriage, I barely had anything tangible to call my own. No collection of fine clothes, no treasured possessions bought for my own pleasure, no hoard of personal achievements, just a lifetime of service, of sacrifice, of making sure everyone else had what they needed, what they desired, while my own needs, my own desires, withered on the vine. By the time I was done, 3 days later, the house felt different, lighter, freer, emptier in some ways, but also filled with a strange, burgeoning sense of possibility. The oppressive weight of his presence, his belongings, his expectations, had begun to lift. The next morning, with a newfound sense of purpose, I called Bruce. He answered on the third ring, his voice clipped, impatient. "What is it, Debbie? I'm rather busy." "I've packed up all your things, Bruce," I said, my voice calm, almost serene. "Every last book, every last sock. You can come pick them up sometime today, or if you prefer, send someone to do it for you. They're in the living room." He exhaled sharply, a hiss of already simmering irritation. "Debbie, for God's sake, do you really have to be this unreasonable, this theatrical? All I asked was for you to help take care of Martha, a dear old friend, for a few short days. You've taken care of people your whole life, my parents, the children. Why are you making such a monumental, destructive big deal out of this one simple request?" Even now, even after I had explicitly told him about the divorce, about the letters, he stood on his pedestal of self-righteousness, looking down on me, judging me, completely oblivious to the earthquake about to shatter his carefully constructed world. I had no patience left for his condescending nonsense, his manipulative justifications. "Bruce," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "I'm only holding on to your things for 3 more hours. If you or someone designated by you is not here to collect them by noon, I'm having them all thrown out, every last piece of it. And by the way," I added, as a casual, devastating afterthought, "the house is mine. The assets, all of them, are mine too. You'll be leaving with the clothes on your back and whatever you can carry out of here in the next 3 hours. Consider this your formal notice." Bruce didn't even let me finish before he exploded in a torrent of rage, cursing, shouting, threatening, before slamming the phone down so hard I imagined the receiver cracking. I couldn't care less how Bruce would choose to deal with things at this point. His anger, his panic, they were his problems now, not mine. Sitting in the sparsely furnished living room, surrounded by the neatly stacked boxes of his life, I began calculating, with a methodical precision that would have surprised him, the finances of my nearly half-century marriage to him. I didn't know all the intricate details of his portfolio. He'd always kept those close to his chest, but I knew enough. I knew there were 3 properties: our primary residence, a vacation cottage by the lake he often used with Martha, and a rental apartment downtown. 2 cars, both relatively new. Bruce, a renowned professor emeritus, had a substantial pension, a hefty portfolio of investments built over decades, and significant bonuses and awards accumulated throughout his illustrious career. A career largely enabled by my family's initial support and my subsequent domestic servitude. I carefully added everything up, step by meticulous step, a cold fury guiding my pen. The 3 hours flew by in a haze of anticipation and grim satisfaction. Noon arrived. No sign of Bruce, no call. He was still trying to call my bluff. I made a call to a local charity that also offered junk removal services for items they couldn't use. "Yes," I said into the phone. "I have a rather large collection of old items, mostly books, papers, and men's clothing, that I need removed today. The sooner the better." They promised a truck would be there within the hour. As their large truck rumbled up the driveway and 2 sturdy men began assessing the mountain of boxes, Bruce finally showed up. His car screeched to a halt at the curb, and he practically vaulted out, his face puce with fury, his usually immaculate hair disheveled. He stopped the movers, who were just about to load a heavy box clearly labeled "Bruce, Academic Papers, Do Not Discard," onto the truck, yelling, his voice cracking with rage. "Stop! Stop right now! What do you think you're doing? Those are my things." Then he turned to glare at me, his eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and murderous rage. "Debbie, you wouldn't dare. You've gone too far this time. You've finally, completely lost your mind." I looked at him coldly, my expression unreadable, my posture unyielding. "I warned you, Bruce. You chose not to believe me. You came too late. Your 3 hours are up." "You're impossible," Bruce shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me, his face contorted. You vindictive shrew." The person he had always oppressed, the quiet, unassuming woman who had never dared raise her voice to him, was now someone entirely different, someone he didn't recognize, someone he clearly, belatedly, feared. Finally, Bruce began to truly see me, not as an extension of himself, but as an adversary. He took a deep, ragged breath, visibly trying to regain some semblance of control. "Fine," he spat, his voice thick with resentment. "If you're so determined to destroy everything, let's talk about this ridiculous divorce. Let's get it over with." "Good," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "I thought we needed to have this talk. Come inside. I have the papers ready." This was the climax. His arrival, his fury, and his forced capitulation to finally discuss the divorce on my terms, surrounded by the imminent disposal of his entire material life. We sat down in the now strangely bare living room, the ghostly outlines of where furniture used to be a testament to the life that was being dismantled. He sat stiffly on one of the few remaining dining chairs I'd pulled in, while I took the armchair, his usual seat, a small act of defiance that didn't go unnoticed. The air crackled with unspoken animosity. I calmly retrieved the divorce papers from my briefcase and slid them across the polished coffee table towards him. "Everything's in order, Bruce," I said, my voice level. "Ms. Vance, my attorney, has been very thorough. It outlines the division of assets. Just sign here and here." Bruce snatched the papers up, his movements jerky, his face a mask of contempt. He began to read, his eyes scanning the pages with growing alarm. When he reached the section detailing the proposed division of assets, or rather, the complete lack of division in his favor, his eyes widened in stunned disbelief, then narrowed in outrage. You want everything," he stammered, his voice incredulous, color flooding his face. The house, the cottage, the apartment, the cars, my pension, my investments. Everything. Debbie, how dare you? This is extortion. This is madness, I smiled, a bitter, mirthless curl of my lips. Dare I, Bruce? After nearly 50 years of your deceit, you cheated on me, consistently, pathologically, for the entirety of our marriage. Martha is the co-conspirator in your decades-long betrayal. Adultery, Bruce, a clear, undeniable, and protracted breach of our marital vows. And with all this evidence I gestured to a thick binder I placed deliberately on the table beside the divorce papers. What exactly did you expect to happen? Did you think I would just meekly walk away with a pittance, while you and Martha ride off into the sunset with the fruits of my family's legacy and my lifetime of labor? His gaze flickered to the binder, a flicker of unease, of dawning fear in his eyes. Or were you perhaps hoping to argue? I continued, my voice like velvet-wrapped steel. Because the law, Bruce, is quite clear on such matters, especially with the sheer volume of proof I possess. The demonstrably guilty party, the one who has systematically squandered marital assets on an illicit affair, often doesn't get a penny. You leave with nothing, Bruce. Absolutely nothing but your personal effects, which are currently awaiting your decision on the curb. As I clearly laid out the unpalatable facts, naming Martha, his precious Martha, as the guilty party, the homewrecker, Bruce's face turned a deep, alarming shade of crimson. He opened his mouth to argue, to bluster, to threaten, but I didn't hesitate. I picked up the binder and slammed it down on the coffee table in front of him with a decisive thud. The impact echoed in the tense silence. Perhaps you'd like to review the supporting documentation before you make any rash decisions, I suggested, my voice dangerously sweet. Bruce picked up the binder, his hands shaking visibly. He opened it, his face drained of all color, turning a pasty, sickly gray as he scanned the first few pages. Copies of his own passionate, incriminating letters to Martha, detailed timelines of their trysts, credit card statements showing lavish gifts and romantic getaways, even a few blurry but identifiable photographs of them together in compromisingly intimate settings sent to me anonymously years ago but dismissed by me at the time as malicious gossip. Now, they were damning proof. His hands shook so violently he could barely hold the pages steady as he pointed a trembling finger at me, his voice a hoarse whisper. How do you have these? Where did you get all of this? For over 48 years of our marriage, I had meticulously played the role of the dutiful, subservient housewife, soft-spoken, mild-mannered, always tending to the household, always putting his needs, his comforts, his career first. Bruce had long since stopped seeing me as a person, an individual with thoughts and feelings of her own, let alone an equal partner. He thought I was weak, easily manipulated, utterly dependent on him, and, frankly, not very bright. He thought I had no voice of my own, no will, no capacity for independent action. But I wasn't just some docile, unthinking woman. I had once been a brilliant student, top of my class, from a family of respected intellectuals. My parents were both university professors, accomplished and admired in their fields. Bruce, on the other hand, had come from humble beginnings, a small, struggling farm his only legacy. When he met me, he was a promising, ambitious student of my father's, charismatic and driven, but with no connections, no money, no influential family to back him. Bruce had his calculating eyes on my family's wealth, our social standing, and our academic influence, not just on me. He had, I now realized with chilling clarity, strategically separated from his supposed true love, Martha, who at the time was equally ambitious but similarly unendowed with social capital, to marry me, the daughter of his influential mentor, all in the hopes of using my family's connections to propel his career, to gain access to a world he craved. I had fallen for him, not just because of his ambition, which I'd mistaken for admirable drive, but because of his charm, his intellect, his carefully feigned kindness and attention. I had thought he was a good man, a brilliant man, destined for great things, but I was young, naive, and tragically wrong. I had built him up in my mind to be some sort of romantic hero, a paragon of virtue and intellect, when he was, in reality, anything but. He was a poor, ambitious student who saw in me and my family a ladder to success. If Bruce had possessed even a shred of moral integrity, he would have been eternally grateful to my parents for welcoming him into our family, for giving him the opportunities, the introductions, the support that had launched his stellar career. But instead, he had cynically used their help, their good name, to climb higher and higher, leaving me further and further behind, a forgotten stepping stone. After our marriage, I did everything in my power to support him, to be the perfect academic's wife. I quit my own promising job to care for his aging, ailing parents, to maintain our home as a sanctuary where he could focus on his work, free from domestic distractions. If he had possessed any sense of responsibility, any decency, he would have honored his vows, left Martha firmly in his past, and shared his life honestly with me. But Bruce didn't care about responsibility, about honor, about me. He was too greedy, too self-absorbed. He took full advantage of my family's unwavering support and used me as an unpaid servant, a social hostess, a caretaker, treating me like nothing more than a household appliance, while he secretly, passionately, romanced other women primarily. Martha. He thought I was trapped, that I would never leave, that I was too dependent, too cowed, too foolish to ever uncover his deceit. And I had kept quiet for so long, not out of foolishness, but out of a misplaced, unrequited love. I had devoted my life to him, sacrificed my own dreams for him, out of what I believed was love. But now, seeing the undeniable proof of his lifelong duplicity, I saw the devastating truth. Bruce had never loved me, not truly. So why should I continue to bear the burden of his betrayals, his contempt? Over the years, Bruce and Martha had grown careless, arrogant in their affair, flaunting their special connection at academic conferences, art openings, and dinner parties, always maintaining just enough plausible deniability to deflect suspicion, but enjoying the thrill of their secret. They had taken countless vacations together, romantic trysts disguised as research trips or artistic retreats, enjoying their stolen time without a care in the world, often forgetting to cover their tracks meticulously. But I, fueled by a righteous fury and guided by the trove of letters Bruce himself had so carelessly written and preserved, had meticulously traced their steps, their deceptions, over the past several years. Last Christmas, while I was home preparing for a quiet family holiday, they had gone skiing in the Swiss Alps. This past July, they had vacationed on a secluded Greek island, taking plenty of sun-drenched, intimate photos, some of which had found their way into the binder. This current Christmas season, they were meant to be together again, embarking on a new adventure, with Martha, ever the drama queen, trying to challenge herself with rock climbing in Arizona, despite her age and lack of physical conditioning. She thought her body could still handle the rigors of such a demanding sport. But after living a pampered, sedentary life for years, she wasn't prepared. So she fell, quite dramatically, and broke her leg, the incident that had brought her into my home and precipitated this entire crisis. Seeing his precious lover injured, Bruce had been frantic, unashamedly showing his deep concern and obsessive affection for her, a level of devotion he had never once displayed towards me in nearly 5 decades. Bruce, the brilliant academic, had foolishly forgotten that we were now living in the digital age. As Martha was being attended to by paramedics after her fall, comforted solicitously by a distraught Bruce, a fellow hiker, charmed by the sight of the devoted older couple, had taken a photo capturing the intimate, tender moment between them. The hiker had even posted it on social media with a sappy caption about enduring love. People assumed they were a loving, long-married couple, admiring their perfect, selfless devotion, completely unaware of the sordid truth, that they were simply 2 aging, pathetic cheaters. Bruce never expected that I, his quiet, unassuming wife, would get my hands on so many intimate photos, videos shared between them, and detailed records of their illicit activities. Bruce was a highly respected, influential university professor, now retired, but still basking in the glow of his academic achievements. Martha was a well-known, if somewhat controversial film critic and minor art personality. They both understood, perhaps better than anyone, the catastrophic scandal their decades-long affair could cause if it became public knowledge. Bruce finally looked up from the binder, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning respect. He tried to speak, to salvage something from the wreckage of his life. He attempted to soften his tone, to appeal to my long-dormant empathy. "Debbie, please, I just can't let go of Martha. She means so much to me, but nothing physical ever happened between us until recently. It was an emotional connection, a meeting of minds." Before he could finish his pathetic, transparent lie, I interrupted him sharply, my voice cutting through his excuses like a surgeon's scalpel. "Don't lie to me, Bruce, not anymore. The letters, the photos, the receipts, they tell a very different, very vivid story. A story of decades of physical intimacy, of shared beds and secret rendezvous. If you were a man with any shred of dignity, any remorse, you wouldn't be sitting here trying to justify your disgusting behavior. You would sign those papers and leave." I tapped the divorce agreement with a polished fingernail. "I won't give you any more chances. The divorce is non-negotiable. The terms are non-negotiable." Seeing my unwavering, steely resolve, Bruce, for the first time in our marriage, seemed to shrink. His bluster, his arrogance, his condescension, all of it evaporated, leaving behind a defeated, frightened old man. He tried one last, desperate gambit, appealing to what he mistakenly believed was my enduring sense of fairness, or perhaps my greed. Can you at least leave me 20% of the assets? For my retirement, my reputation." I rejected him coldly, without a moment's hesitation. "Don't even think about it, Bruce. 20%? You're lucky I'm not suing you and Martha for emotional distress and punitive damages. You're lucky I'm not going to the press with this binder." I looked at him, each word deliberate, final. "The divorce is happening, today, and you leave with nothing. Absolutely nothing. As for your disgusting affair with Martha, I won't actively expose it to the media right now, but I will keep this binder. And if you, or Martha, or my dear children, do anything at all, to harm me, to slander my name, to contest this settlement, or to make my life difficult in any way, shape, or form, you know the consequences. This," I patted the binder, "goes public, and your precious reputations will be shredded beyond repair." Bruce knew the consequences all too well. He had spent a lifetime cultivating his image, basking in years of undeserved praise and unearned recognition. He couldn't bear the thought of being publicly shamed, of having his carefully constructed legacy revealed as a fraud. The thought of his colleagues, his former students, the academic world at large, knowing the sordid truth, it was unthinkable. In the end, with a shaking hand and a look of utter desolation, he signed the divorce papers. He signed away his home, his assets, his future financial security, all to protect the fragile shell of his reputation. Once Bruce had signed the papers, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and shuffled out of the house like a broken man, refusing my offer to call him a cab. The ink on the divorce agreement was barely dry when Eddie and Sandra arrived, apparently summoned by a frantic call from their father. They stormed in, their faces flushed with anger, their eyes blazing with self-righteous indignation. "Mom, how could you?" Eddie demanded, his voice trembling with rage. "How can you be so heartless, so greedy? Dad just called us. He's devastated. He said you've taken everything." Sandra joined the chorus, her voice shrill. They demanded, their tone dripping with accusation, as if I had committed some unspeakable, heinous crime. They bombarded me with a fresh barrage of accusations. "You want him to leave with absolutely nothing. What have you contributed to this family financially? This house, the investments, all of it is the result of our dad's hard work, his brilliance. How can you be so vicious, so vindictive toward him? Doesn't your conscience hurt you at all?" I couldn't help but laugh, a hollow, empty sound, at their misplaced righteous anger, their profound, willful blindness. My voice, when I finally spoke, was preternaturally calm, dangerously quiet. You want to talk about conscience, children? Fine. Let me ask you, where is your conscience? I sneered, a look of utter contempt on my face. From the time you were born, tell me, did your father ever once take care of you for even a single day? Did he ever cook you a meal, wash your clothes, change your diaper, or even drive you anywhere? To school, to a doctor's appointment, without it being a major inconvenience for him? No, that was all me. My work, my sacrifice. The person you now claim has no conscience. They were stunned into momentary silence by the unexpected ferocity of my response, by the unshakable conviction in my voice.